push that separately. It shouldn't end broadcast. Okay. That's really strange. Maybe there we go. Okay. All right, let's try this again. Hi, everybody. Thank you for joining. We're experiencing some technical difficulties completely because of this guy right here. Hopefully, you guys can hear me. If I can get an audio check, that would be a great way to get things started. Just because streaming on Discord is harder than I thought. So if we can get an audio check, that would be cool. Hopefully, everybody can hear me. Audio is 100%. Okay, outstanding. All good. Awesome. Okay. Well, thank you guys so much for hanging out while I figure out this nonsense on my end. This is kind of our annual thing that we do where we take a look at the survey that Ethan puts out from the Selfh.st Newsletter. And I think without spending too much time going on with my nonsense, I'm going to switch over here and we're going to jump over right to there and welcome everybody to the live stream. Ethan, if you'd like to jump in and run the show here, that'd be awesome.
Yeah, sure. Thanks, DB, as usual, for hosting the live stream. Some of the technical issues we had getting up and running is the exact reason I don't like to host this live stream. So thanks for letting me leverage your resources.
Of course.
DB, I think you and I touch base very regularly throughout the year, and this is pretty much the one time we chat outside of just Discord chat. So first off, very nice to speak face-to-face or as face-to-face as video is. This year, we're switching it up a little bit. We also have Matt Foxx joining us. We figured maybe everyone might get a little bored of hearing DB and I drone about the same results every year over year. So mixing it up, asked Matt to join us. Matt, for those of you who aren't familiar with him, is the developer of Multi-Scrobbler, which is a self-hosted application for scrobbling music listens from various platforms into a centralized place. That is, of course, how he asked me to introduce him, but I know him from a lot more. If you click into his profile, he has a blog where he writes amazing blog posts that I include in the newsletter every week when I can. He also is a bit of an aficionado. You'll find his home lab diagrams and networking occasionally shared to Reddit, and always blows my mind. He's become somewhat, I don't know if he even knows this, of a confidant for me in the last several months. If something pops up during the week that I'm trying to include in the newsletter and I don't know much about, I defer to him often. So Matt, thanks a bunch for joining us today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. Glad you let me weigh in today. Hopefully my opinions aren't too strong.
Yeah, looking forward to it.
Hey guys, I need to pause for just 1 second
Sure.
to fix something that that Matt pointed out to me when we did this the other night, and that is that I didn't have the right thing going here, and of course it's going to be like that, isn't it? Oops, nope. I should have just left it alone. Discord, why? Okay, well then let's. Oh God, there. Let's just do this. You know what? Why? Oh come on. Are you kidding me? It's not letting me, because I'm stupid, that's all. It won't, there we go. Okay, sort of. Sorry, I was hoping I could get this window to pop out and hide everything else, but now Discord isn't giving me the option to switch to the thing that we just had, window capture. Discord, the self-host, there it is. Okay, I think that's better. Okay. Sorry guys, I wanted to get rid of all of the other stuff that was in the window that was extraneous. Thank you for your patience. Have at.
Yeah, so we have a lot of good results from this year's survey that we're going to jump into today. One thing I do want to take just a really quick sidebar before we start. If any of you follow DB throughout the week on any of his socials, you probably know that he recently hit 100,000 subscribers here on YouTube. Congratulations.
Thank you so
I
much.
believe that came with a nice special delivery of some sort this week. I don't know if you have that handy or...
I got sidetracked on another project. It's still sitting in the kitchen, but I did get my silver play button. Real excited about that. Thank you to everybody who's helped get the channel to that point. Real excited to be there and be kind of part of a community that we've built over the last several years. So real excited about that.
No, Well, congrats again.
Thanks.
With that being said, I think we can jump into the survey here.
Right.
Just a quick intro, I guess, before we jump in too far. This year's survey was facilitated by using a platform called Formbricks, which was new to me. They also sponsored the survey, but I usually try and find a sponsor survey that, or someone to sponsor that also has a platform I can self-host a survey just to let people or familiarize people with the various platforms out there. And I, kind of sponsorship set aside, had a fantastic experience with Formbricks. I think it was the most successful survey I've had so far in terms of people having issues with the technology behind the survey. There's a lot of complex logic going on behind the scenes. When people selected one answer, I tried to divert them to another question if the remaining ones weren't pertinent and stuff like that. So super happy with Formbricks. I'll try and talk to some of the nuances as we go through the survey. I know in some of the social posts I had shared yesterday after publishing the survey, had some questions about when certain people were and weren't asked specific questions based on previous answers. So we can chat about some of this. But without further ado, let's get started. First question, why are people self-hosting at a very high level? And so obviously responses were personal, enterprise, or both. As usual, every year, this is the first question I kick off with. The trend looks almost exactly the same. At least in terms of my audience, most people are self-hosting for personal purposes. There are just under 700 people who are doing it from an enterprise perspective. So I assume they either have small businesses they're running where they're self-hosting for those purposes, or they're working for another company and they're self-hosting that company's infrastructure as well. That jumps in, that leads into the next question. And this is kind of the first caveat I have. In prior years, I had just let everyone answer this question, and there's always confusion. Oh, when I select the answer, the response for how many unique users I serve, is that for my personal infrastructure, or is that my enterprise infrastructure? And so specifically, only people who selected personal were served this question. And so we're looking at the results in front of us. They're a little different than they have been in prior years, surprisingly. Previously, people, the 2 users was the most popular answer, and that was overtaken by 1 user this year. Everything else, I think, trends somewhat similarly. I don't know if it's just the additional people who answered the survey this year were just a bunch of people who only serve 1 user, but I was a bit surprised to see that pop up.
We can hear you. Yeah, he's working on it.
Try that. Okay. All right. How about now? Can you hear me now? No sound.
Is there no sound?
Still no sound?
I'm not sure.
You good? Okay. That's really
There we go.
strange. Okay. Well, as I was saying, I think I was comparing what I was trying to say anyway. Is that last year I compared the numbers from this year to last year, and some of the changes didn't surprise me, but I think some of them did. And I think we're seeing more and more people getting into self-hosting for a lot of reasons that we'll cover later. But I think because we're getting new people in the community, the 1 user doesn't necessarily surprise me that it jumped so much from last year.
I imagine
That's
part of
fair.
that is also just people jumping from 1 to 2 users is a huge deal, especially if you're, it goes from being a hobby where things can break and be down for an indefinite amount of time to somebody actually is depending on you for something. And going back from the partner approval factor or the friend approval factor of
Right.
this is, you told me this would work and now it's not, to okay, well I'm backing off on that and I'll figure it out later kind of thing is I'm sure partially that that factor as well.
Yep, I agree with that. Yeah.
Yeah, I think this is also a tricky question because if I think of the number of servers my Plex server uses or Jellyfin or whatever, it's a vastly different number than the number of people who are utilizing my Vault Warden instance or something like that. So there's a little more nuance to it than I think, and I'm not quite sure how I can capture that. Completely open to feedback. And I also like to plug in the YouTube description of this video, there is a link to my survey feedback form. So if at any point you hear something we chat about or have some feedback about the survey itself, feel free to click that and leave some feedback. I will absolutely take it into account for subsequent surveys.
Cool.
So jumping to the next question, reasons for self-hosting. This is also a tricky question because I think I give too many answers, too many responses. And I think if I take this survey on any given day, I answer slightly differently based on just some of the nuance between the various answers. But the top two this year are the same as they were last year, hobby and privacy, which I don't think is surprising, especially given so many are self-hosting for personal purposes. It makes sense that those two would surface to the top. I know a handful of my containers are privacy focused. As much as I love the hobby of self-hosting, I'm also very privacy focused. And you can see that in my infrastructure for sure.
Yeah, I think when I started, it was a lot of it for me was cost. But as we've gone forward over the past 5 or 6 years, a lot of it, I think it went from cost to hobby and then to privacy for me. Because I needed something that wasn't Netflix for a number of reasons. And then I started making content and it turned into a hobby. And then from there, just the way everybody's handling data these days terrifies me as far as what they're collecting, whether we like it or not.
I was surprised convenience was so high on this list. I don't feel like
Right.
self-hosting is a convenient thing to do at all.
And
Yeah,
I mean, can you think of any instances of software that is more convenient in the self-hosted instance than it would be as a cloud service?
the only thing I can think is that, and cost and convenience are surprising that they're so much lower than hobby and privacy, because you know, for as much as we kind of like to avoid this topic every now and then, piracy is such a large reason for self-hosting and acquiring media.
Mhm.
And cost and convenience, I think, are two of the drivers for that. It's the cost of not paying for a million streaming services, and then it's also the convenience of being able to find everything in one place. So I kind of link those two together. I'm assuming that might be what drives that, but it's a really good point.
Sure.
Self-hosting for me is not convenient in any capacity.
Well, Collins
I
actually brought up a good point in
Oh,
chat,
yeah.
saying that it's convenient once you have it up and running. Like
Yeah.
once the infrastructure is built and everything is running smoothly, then it's convenient until an update breaks something. But that's my own personal little addition to that.
Yeah, thank you. Answering my own question as I thought about it just a little bit there, I'd say probably people will think convenience. They probably think Pi-hole or some other kind of site, like network-wide ad blocker. That's extremely convenient. But it is, as Colin said, convenient once it's up.
Mhm.
Getting there is maybe less convenient.
Yeah, absolutely. Jumping to the next question, we have hardware options. This has changed a little bit since last year as well, especially relative to the change from last year versus the prior year. Top two options are still consumer hardware and low-powered devices like a Raspberry Pi or something. They actually have swapped spots this year. So low-powered device took #1 spot last year. This time it's consumer hardware, low-powered device following after it. The one I wanted to call out specifically was the desktop PC. I noticed that's kind of falling in the rankings throughout the years. I don't know if it's just the familiarity people who are reading my content and responding to the survey have with self-hosting. They get a little more complex into the more complex hardware. Everyone kind of starts out on their desktop PC, turns it on when they need it, turn it off, and then realize that's a little too inconvenient, jump to the server, and then from there it's just kind of hog wild with all the options.
Mm-hmm.
I also wonder if people aren't having as much, just as much hardware laying around as we did, say, 5 years ago. I think with the way prices are with consumer or PCs, graphics cards, those sorts of things. When you're building your own custom PC, it's getting more and more expensive, and I think people are less likely to have spare hardware laying around from a recent upgrade. Whereas you can pick up, a Ugreen NAS for a few $100, throw a couple of drives in it, and have your infrastructure up and running. In a lot of cases, cheaper than using an old desktop PC, just because of how expensive parts are right now.
Yeah, this was definitely I'd say the most interesting question for me on the whole survey. I mentioned this to you a little earlier. I would really like to see a year-over-year change on this kind of information, because as things like Pangolin become more convenient and easier to install, and there are more VPS offerings specifically for self-hosters like Racknerd and stuff, I would be interested to see what like the change on cloud VPS versus low-powered devices or consumer hardware changes, because that becomes an option that is easier or more cost-effective for people. I'd also be interested to see what people are considering to be low-powered devices versus consumer hardware, because I imagine people think low-powered devices like Raspberry Pis, but they might be putting like those thin client Lenovo's or HP's like off of eBay in the consumer hardware, or in the low-powered devices. It's a little vague, but it'd be interesting to see what the difference between people thinking, oh, Raspberry Pi is for self-hosting versus I'm going on eBay to buy old office hardware. Like what's the difference there?
Yeah, that's
Yeah, and I think you
Go ahead.
Yeah, I think you actually hit on two of the questions Jay Collins had brought up in the chat, asked specifically about the change in VPS, and it actually was pretty substantial year over year. Cloud VPS was 1,300, almost 1,400 responses this year, and
97 last year.
97
Wow, really?
last year.
Yeah, it was
God.
97 for cloud VPS last year.
I bet
So
Pangolin is a huge percentage of that.
Yeah,
believe
I think
that.
it's Pangolin jumping in. Also, there are a lot of services like Picapods. They sponsor me a few times throughout the year and various things. I think those are what people where they're kind of like one-click install applications. There are a bunch of them that I can't think of off the top of my head. I think people are also classifying those as cloud VPS as well in this category. Collins also asked what the difference was between a desktop PC and consumer hardware. I think it's a really good question. I should probably explain a little further in next year's server. I think in my mind, like a desktop PC is exactly what you think it is, a desktop PC. Consumer hardware to me would be, I guess, like pre-built hardware that's not quite enterprise hardware. I'm thinking like Dell Optiplex, like the Lenovo ThinkCenter, something that's not
So like an old workstation.
yeah, something along those lines. But it's a really good point. I should consider that for next year, how I can rephrase that to make sure I'm capturing how various people view those things.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then John brings up a good point as well. As far as Nooks being low powered, are people classifying those are low powered, or are they sticking with things like Raspberry Pi?
Yeah. Are you talking about low compute power or low like actual wattage power?
Right.
You know, it's a large category.
Yeah, absolutely something to consider for next year.
Right.
But along the hardware front, network attached storage, just again, always include this question, how many people are deploying a NAS for whatever purpose. I think just the trends and across other questions, it's pretty easy for me to tell that the people who are doing this are also the people who were oriented towards the media streaming questions and responses to other questions. And so obviously that's a big thing, but there's a lot more than just media that people are storing the NAS on. That was actually kind of my first big build when I got into self-hosting, trying to find some way to store things, whether it was my own personal photos and videos, or if it was other content I had. So not surprising to see there are so many more people who deploy than don't deploy.
I think what's interesting to me is like the numbers from this year and last year aren't all that different. Like this year we've got, like 2,700 that do. Last year was only 2,300 that do. So it's like 400. And I wonder if that's just that many more people having answered the survey, because the number of no responses was only like 40 different. So I wonder if a part of that bump has to do with just more people answering the survey this year.
Yeah, and Collins is bringing up another good point in the chat. I think I just need to hire him to help with next year's survey. How many people branded NAS versus a do-it-yourself NAS? And this is actually a really good point, because my NAS is also a server. The only difference between it and some of my other machines is that it has 10 hard drives in it, and maybe some hardware to support all that storage versus the other. But aside from that, when you look at the number of services I'm running, it doesn't really differ from my other machines. Collins, Ethan, let's talk. So jumping to the next question, sensitive data. This isn't surprising. Also isn't different or too different from prior years. How many people are avoiding self-hosting sensitive information? I have listed here, and kind of my takeaway with each question I've been including, for security and backup reasons. So a lot of people provide some context behind their answers, and that seems to be why the people who are avoiding self-hosting the sensitive information aren't self-hosting it, because they either don't trust their backups, or they don't trust that their infrastructure can keep things like their passwords or their sensitive photos safe.
Yeah.
I want to
Go ahead.
I want to emphasize what you just said, not to jump ahead in the survey at all, but the amount of people here who are not avoiding, but then also only have 0 to 1 backup of their data is a bit unnerving. As Scarlett's in the chat said there, it is pretty scary to see the lack of backup, but are also hosting things that are clearly, or trying to save things that are clearly you should have more than 1 backup of. Is
right.
It's a bit concerning.
So next question, operating systems. This is almost always the question I get the most feedback about, because I never list every specific distribution or flavor of Linux or what other operating systems people are using out there. This year, I was very specific in trying to target the really like homelab kind of media center geared operating systems. That's why you see things like Open Media Vault, TrueNAS, Unraid, the things that I know are absolutely popular in the crowd that I wanted to capture. I understand so many of them are Linux based and could be categorized as Linux. I think last year I phrased it as generic Linux to try and separate the two. But I did leave a note in the commentary on this survey based on user feedback. I will include a subsequent question in next year's survey that allows anyone who selects Linux to actually select or provide further information about their actual flavor, and then we can hopefully provide some helpful and interesting stats on that as well.
Nice. One of the things that I'm noticing, I've got last year's survey open in a separate window here, and Disk Station Manager from Synology, that number is 4 times what it was last year, which honestly kind of surprises me after the stuff that Synology pulled this year. To see that number go up so much, it genuinely shocks me, with as angry as people were at Synology for their different reasons. To see that go up so much, it just kind of stood out to me.
Yeah, I almost need to include a question that's something like, did you participate last year? So I can tell, are these trends across people who are, the same people who didn't use Synology last year, are they this year? Or do I have a different subset of people that seem to be using this? Because Home Assistant OS is also very similar. If you look at last year's survey, there were 16 responses of people who selected Home Assistant OS, or the Home Assistant's operating system, in this question. And this year, it's the 3rd most popular option with 1,200 responses. I don't run Home Assistant OS. I run Home Assistant in Docker because I enjoy chaos. But I don't think Home Assistant OS has changed that much since last year that would have done anything to encourage mass adoption, other than if they have some hardware that maybe they've released in the last year that might have encouraged people who are buying it to install it directly on there. Well, I have no idea what the trend is. I'd be interested to hear.
I think a big part of that is there are so many more companies that are classified as works with Home Assistant, to help kind of ease that transition into committing to it, because I think people are seeing that like companies are taking this seriously now, and I feel like they feel like they'll have fewer issues getting this new piece of hardware to work. So I think they're more willing to commit to a dedicated system like that.
Yeah. Congrats to them, though. Home Assistant's doing great things. We're going to talk about them more in the survey. So it's cool to see that that's growing in popularity. I'm sure that's helping a lot. It does streamline running the platform. So
Yeah.
I'm sure with it being a lot of people's kind of first foray into self-hosting, I'm sure it's made a world of a difference to have that ready and, completely different from the old days of YAML and all that other stuff that you need to get
Ugh.
Home Assistant up and running. And then Matt, I think you just chatted about this. You brought this up a little bit ago. Backup strategies. How are people storing or capturing their backups? And then again, I kind of just dug into the data a little bit on my own on the back end and noted that of the responses, only 34% store data in a single location. I think there might be an element of people, again, I'm going to lean into the like Plex, like Sonar Radar crowd, that a lot of their data is data that's completely recoverable. Like that would be easy to get back if it's just a bunch of movies and TV shows, that they're comfortable with maybe like an off-site backup somewhere. And then in the worst case scenario where they don't have anything, like it's not the end of the world, like there are places to get it online. I assume that's playing a role here, but honestly, I'm not 100% positive.
I guess there could also be some missing data here, since there's not a question on how many backups you have. You could have on site, you could have 3 copies on 3 different, backup drives. So that might be missing from this as well.
Yeah, it's a really good point.
Yeah, all of my backups are on site, and I know you're supposed to have at least one off site, and I haven't done that yet. But I think when we get to our next question, and I say this every year, people are using the offsite option, and I really need to join that crowd.
Yeah, I do a little bit of.
No,
go ahead, Matt.
I have another friend who's also light into self-hosting and Plex kind of stuff, and we are backup buddies. We each have a little container that holds hard drives and foam, and we switch them out every 6 months or so. And I keep mine at his, and he keeps his at mine. So it's nice to have people around who are also into the hobby.
That's a really cool idea. I dig that a lot.
Dream scenario. Actually, that makes me wonder if a good future question would be, do you know someone else in real life who self-hosts?
Yeah.
Because I'm not sure I have someone in my life that I can do that with.
Yeah, it's definitely a privilege to have someone who's he's like 5 minutes down the road from me. So.
Oh, nice.
Very jealous.
Right.
Very jealous. Next question digs into those who selected cloud in that backup question. Who are you using? There are always a ton of responses, and I try my hardest to kind of go through and streamline because everyone spells something slightly different and it's hard to aggregate things. And I think I've captured everything. I know the other bar is huge. I almost thought about just completely removing it from the chart and then just making the note down here. But there were a lot of options, and I wish I had included how many other providers are in this other bucket, because it's a lot. And it's a lot of providers I've never heard of. But when I come to the non-other responses, all of those that had 50 or more responses, none of them are super surprising. I think Backblaze and Google Drive have been at the top as long as this survey's been around. It's not surprising because they're 2 big names. But it is really a nice mix of what I would call enterprise level services versus consumer offering. So very smartly, people are leveraging, their Google Drive storage that they get for whatever reason, subscribing to some other Google service, or similar for OneDrive with Microsoft. So not super surprising.
Yeah, some of these I've never heard of, and Collins brought one up. pCloud, never heard of pCloud.
He says it always screams scam to him.
Yeah, I've never heard of it, and I guess I'd have to do some more investigation. But I think year over year, when we review these, Backblaze is always at the top, and I really just need to bite the bullet and figure out how much it's going to cost me to have a backup of my stuff there.
Yeah, I use Backblaze myself, and I think when I had done a cost analysis in the past, at least across some of the more enterprise level, they made the most sense price-wise. I should probably revisit it, but I think there's a reason you hear them spoken about so much. So,
Sure.
And they of course have other stuff. They publish their quarterly drive stats and stuff like that. So I think they've also done they do a lot of other content and interactions with the community that have built that trust there. So again, not super surprising.
Yeah. I think I know the answer to the question, but I think it would be interesting to see what percentage of people are backing up everything versus, as you mentioned earlier, like just sensitive data. Because obviously you don't want to back up, 4 terabytes of Plex movies when you can just re-download them again if you need to recover. I mean, I think it would be a very small percentage backing up everything, but it would still be an interesting metric to see.
Yeah, I've got a fairly small amount of stuff, it's like my phone backups, those sorts of things, my wife's phone backups that all hit my NAS back here and just kind of live there. And I think that for me would be the most important thing to have an offsite backup of just in case. But like all of my media, it's whatever, and because I recently downsized my home lab, I could just, if I had to, if something happened, I could just grab that box and run. And I would have my entire home lab in a cube, and it would be feasible to take it with me. Whereas like the 45 drive or the HL15, not super friendly to move around. So yeah, I think if I could just back up my family photos and videos and that sort of thing, that's all I would really need to have offsite.
Yeah, I think another interesting question would be, okay, for those who back up their data, how many people test their backups with some sort of regularity?
That's
a big
be
thing.
a very scary number.
Right.
Absolutely. I can't tell you, I'm like very prescriptive about my backups. I do everything very manually. The number of times I've mistyped a database password or a SQL dump command, and I've just backed up an empty SQL file for weeks until I went back and noticed is more times than I can count. So if you're listening and don't back up or test your backups, please test your backups.
Yeah, it's a lot of discipline for a hobby.
Yeah.
Okay, so jumping into the next section of questions, thus the color change here. Containers are so popular, at least amongst the home lab crowd. I would assume in professional environments they're popular as well, but I can't personally speak to that. Unsurprisingly, overwhelmingly, people use containers in some capacity in their home lab infrastructure. It's interesting to me. I still come across people on the Fediverse or Reddit who are adamant about not using containers. And I'm not quite sure I get it. And they're probably a lot better at bare metal and other things than I am, that they don't mind it as much. But sometimes whether a container is available will make it or break it, whether I deploy a project or not.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah,
unfortunately.
So I guess my question here was there some sort of I don't remember. Was there some sort of an explanation, or do you think people were just talking about like Docker containers? Or are we talking about like Linux containers as well as part of that?
Yeah, that's a good question, and maybe I should elaborate in the question next year. There's another question that asks specifically what like container technology people are using,
right?
But that's only for people who have already selected yes to do they deploy containers. So if there are people who are thinking this is one versus the other and click no, then they would have missed that question.
Right. Okay.
So good call out. Next question is, okay, if you deploy containers, do you prefer them to bare metal? Most people do. It looks like there's a fair amount of people who it depends, which I think makes sense. I think some people like to run databases bare metal and then everything else in a container or for whatever reason. So I think that's fairly similar to responses from prior years.
Yeah.
Container orchestration. I was surprised by this question. The amount of people who are using an orchestration platform is much higher than I expected. I would have expected fewer than 10%.
Yeah, this was something I pointed out earlier as well. Is I'm wondering what that percentage of, was there a question on this last year as well? Yeah, there was, and there was also a fairly the same amount of people, and I'm wondering how many of those are from methods that simplified orchestration like K3 or like Talos OS, where it's just a full VM that or a full operating system that just does everything for you, and all you have is the control plane. Because it seems fairly high considering how difficult Kubernetes can be.
Absolutely. I think in a previous year I had asked if people were what they were using, and I cannot remember what the results were, but that may be something for next year to ask what people are using, if they are using some sort of platform for that. The next one, container platforms, another repeat question, very similar results, Docker and LXC being the top two responses. Docker overwhelmingly are what people are using. And then, of course, as things like Prox/Mox continue to grow, LXC continuing with strong representation there as well. Do either of you use Podman at all, by the way?
I've looked into it, and I've heard that it's more secure because it's rootless. But as far as actually deploying it, I haven't.
I also haven't. I've also looked into it pretty extensively, but it just seems like there's a much higher barrier to entry to use it, and it's a lot of the I have heard the security as well, but there's a lot you can do on the Docker side to get pretty close as far as mitigation, as far as I understand it. So, I mean, it's a cool technology, but it just seems not as easy to use as an end user.
Yeah, it's interesting that when I see people talk about it, they speak about it as if it's a no-brainer that you should use it instead of something like Docker. But I've just never chased it myself personally.
Yeah, I've seen the same kind of sentiment, but then I don't know. I think these people they're just smarter than us maybe, and they'll realize that how much more difficult it is. Like one of the main arguments is always that it's daemonless, that it doesn't need like a background service running, but then that requires you to understand systemd well enough to set up like quadlets and stuff, and like what's a quadlet and how does that translate to Docker Compose, and then by the time you have that set up, you're basically running a daemon with systemd anyway. So there's a lot of proselytizing around it, and kudos to them for being more secure. But it seems like a false equivalency to say that it's just as easy as Docker.
Yeah, that's a lot of complexity for people who just want to share their movies with friends and
Right.
automate their smart home hardware.
Yeah.
Next two questions are management software. So if you deploy containers, do you use some sort of software platform to do it? This is actually fairly close to a 50-50 split, and not super surprising. One, because I know Docker Run, and Compose can be intimidating to people when they first start. And then two, there are just a lot of good platforms that streamline this very easily for people. I'm thinking even something like Unraid. And honestly, I don't even know if I mentioned Unraid as a platform, but it almost is, because you don't deploy containers in the same way you do if you're running Docker Compose or just Docker Run commands. But the top three selections received most of the responses for what platforms are people using: Portainer, Dockage, and Komodo. I don't think that's super surprising to me. Portainer continues to dominate the responses. Not sure if that will always be. I listened to John and the Servers at Home guys talk about this a little bit yesterday. And Portainer is a great platform. We'll always have support because it's also enterprise based, but it was also kind of like the first one in the space. And so I think some of its popularity it'll always retain that for that reason.
Well, I think one of the issues with Dockage is that it hasn't been updated in 8 months. Louis Lamb has been working on Uptime Kuma 2 for a really long time and has focused a lot of his energy there. And I think as a result of that, Dockage has kind of just had to sit in an idle state for a really long time. So I'm really hoping now that Uptime Kuma 2 is more ready for prime time, I guess, that some more effort can be put into keeping Dockage updated. And I think that would be a huge help for those people who want to step away from Portainer, because they are very like enterprise leaning, even in their community edition stuff. And I actually really liked Dockage, but I can't trust its security if it hasn't had an update in 8 months.
Yeah, absolutely. Matt, I know you're a Komodo guy, right? And
Yep.
it's funny,
Yep.
we were chatting about that, and I saw some comments earlier when we brought it up. I worked with the Komodo you guys a little bit on or connected with them a little bit earlier this year, and they actually recommended I connect with you, Matt. This was before
Oh,
we had ever spoken. So those guys know you and think very highly of you if you weren't aware of that. Not that the rest of us don't, but I know Komodo is, I'm glad to see Komodo on the list. I'm glad to see where it is because Komodo is relatively young compared to some of these other platforms. I think Dockage is too. I don't think Dockage has the maturity that Portainer does. But I would expect next year to see that Komodo number grow a lot because it's doing a lot of cool things for a lot of people.
yeah. I won't gush too much about it, but the V2 release is soon for Komodo, and it's gonna really blow V1 out of the water as far as what it can do, and it's really becoming more of a full home lab management system with like dual like bi connection between periphery and core, like kind of taken over as like an SSH agent and terminal stuff.
Wow.
Just great software, and it also, from my experience, really forces you to think about deploying and configuring your home lab in a way that's scalable. That Dockage is fantastic for getting people right into it with a UI that makes it easier. And Portainer's got a little bit of that scalability in thinking about your whole topology, the infrastructure, your home lab in a way. But Komodo really, I don't know. It's a whole new way to think about it, and it's great. Yeah.
Yeah, and I see in the chat, Just Helixia mentioned Arcane. I actually have that in the commentary down here because it was one of the other more popular responses, just didn't quite cross the threshold that I felt should be charted, but was one of the few that I isn't really on my radar, or if I've seen it, it's just in passing in the past. And I meant to check into it because enough people brought it up, but it still beat out some of the other popular options like Unohost and CloudDrum, which are on there as well. So I'd be anxious to check that out as well for sure.
Oh, well, one more thing I wanted to mention about Komodo. Sorry, not to get on too hard,
Oh,
but
sure.
for
No
people in the
worries.
chat who didn't know that V2 is coming, it's going to support Docker Swarm, which is huge.
Oh,
I think
nice.
it's the only. I think Portainer also supports Swarm to some extent, but it's definitely of the things that are listed here, it's the only other tool that's going to support Swarm. So that's pretty huge.
Wow.
Very
So
cool.
that might also take up next year's orchestration platform number as
Yeah.
well.
Wow.
Yeah.
It'll be interesting to see if there's a correlation between those two responses.
Yeah.
And I think that's actually a good lead into the next question about update methodology, because I know there's a really great blog post that's made its rounds around the communities I frequent about using Komodo and its capabilities to automate how they're updating based on, and I have not used Komodo extensively myself, so I can't really speak to it, but I know it's been a game changer for a lot of people. But just kind of taking one step back and looking at the overall results, I'm fairly happy to see the results as they are. Most people are doing manual updates, which I prefer anything to blind automatic updates. I don't think automatics are bad as long as you can do some sort of version tagging where you can ensure that automatic updates don't take you to a breaking version. Like if you can tag specifically with V2 or V2.1, and maybe that's a good differentiation for next year's survey. But I think the people who are just flying by the seat of their pants with Watchtower, I think that crowd is decreasing more and more every year.
Yeah, I definitely fall into the both category. Like if it's say my AdGuard container, I don't care. It'll take me 2 minutes to spin it back up and run an AdGuard sync back to the setting of the one that didn't crash on me. So I think there are definitely certain containers that I don't care if they crash. But yeah, for the most part, I do almost everything manually.
Yeah. Partially, I'm also manual for the most part, and I think less of it is because I don't trust like Watchtower or Komodo auto update, but like, developers don't have any, they can semver or they can not, and even then they can break versioning, and you just don't know if like an actual minor update is going to be breaking changes or not. So it's always good to review before you update.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, that's a good point. The versioning only makes a difference if developers know how to use it
If they're
properly.
yeah,
Not
if they're
to
self-enforcing.
completely rebuild their database schema on a .2 instead of a full release.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Sounds like that may have happened to you recently.
Not recently, but it was what definitely put me off from doing automatic updates. Is I had something that I was just like, screw it, it's fine, and then it wasn't, and I lost everything because I didn't have a good backup strategy in place at that time either. So I had just set myself up for failure across the board.
Yeah, sometimes experience is the best way
It
to learn,
absolutely is.
unfortunately. Jumping into the next section, this is all about networking. Matt, I know you had offline some questions about the firewall question here, and I probably should either drop it or elaborate on it more next year. I think last year I asked what people are running, if they're running something like pfSense or OpenSense or what they're running on their routers, but it's really just trying to see how many people have jumped into that networking game where like one minor change is gonna completely wipe their internet until they figure out how to get it back, versus just like the simple port forwarding feature from your Verizon router or whatever. So I'm an OpenSense guy. I've brought my network down an unfortunate amount of times, but I do feel better about my self-hosted infrastructure after having gone that direction. I would definitely recommend it if people haven't looked into it.
I'm not much of a networking guy. It just doesn't make a lot of sense to me. So I'm actually really glad that I've got a Unify system that I tell it kind of what I want it to do, and it just does it. And I don't have to worry about trying to configure a lot of that stuff, because like I've looked at OpenSense and pfSense, and it is a completely foreign world to me when I get into that level of things.
I'm also in the same boat of networking is, I understand it pretty well, but I prefer to leave that to the experts, because I'm already got my fingers in so many things. Like the last thing I need is for myself to shoot myself in the foot on the internet. So I actually reminds me, I followed a guide to bypass my AT&T router like a month ago. So I'm just going straight to the fiber drop from my Unify gateway, and I don't think I have a backup of that configuration. So, I got egg on my face for not having the really important stuff backed up at this point, and meddling the network thing that I really shouldn't be meddling with.
Well, best of luck to you for that.
Right.
I'm primarily for my job a remote worker, and so it makes me a little nervous every time an OpenSense update comes through, because if my network goes down, I also can't work, which is also an issue. So I obviously save those updates for the weekends. But someone really quickly in the chat, going back to the update, someone made a really good point about maybe a future question: how do people get their updates, or how do they know when releases drop so they know when to update their containers? That's a really good question, because I know a lot of great tools have popped up in the last year. I use a command line tool called DocCheck that I'm absolutely in love with, but I know there are a dozen others that work really well. It'd be interesting to see how the community is split across those.
Yeah.
Remote access, jumping to this, a very opinionated area in self-hosting. I feel like this and open source get the most people riled up whenever I speak about them in the intros to my newsletters. But asking people in this first question, how are you accessing services outside of your LAN? VPN and reverse proxy are the top two. Unsurprisingly, a strange number of forwarded ports. I don't know if that's like you forward your Plex port because, like, for the most part, that's relatively safe. It's never been a huge issue for anyone, or if those are just people who are YOLOing it and don't quite care.
I've seen a lot of people on Reddit, when somebody's like, "Hey, how do I access this remotely?" The number of people that just forward the port, and they don't give any qualification of, but be careful when you do that, because it's just forward the port. and so few people are willing to say, hey, look, you can do that, but and I feel like if somebody doesn't have the answer of how do I access this remotely, they're inherently not going to understand the security implications of just opening ports on their network. And when I see those posts, for a while I would comment saying, hey, that's a bad idea, there's another option. And the number of people that would just jump down my throat because it doesn't matter, it's not a big deal, I quit responding to those posts on Reddit because the number of people that are just like, it doesn't matter, just blew my mind.
Yeah, if you use software like any of the R suite like Sonar Radar, in the last few years, they've pretty much forced people to start using the built-in authentication. For it used to be completely optional, but so many people were forwarding their ports. I remember, I don't know, probably like 5 or 6 years ago, you used to be able to go onto Shodan and just do a search for like port 8989 and all these Sonar instances would pop up. I specifically remember the R's, and I don't know why. And I promise I never did anything nefarious, but like you could go in, you could just very easily from the Shodan results pull it up and see, just to get the Sonar view and access that you have as if you were logging in today. And so they've since changed that, and like I'm absolutely certain that's why, because you could still do a Shodan search today and still see all of them, but now they're at least protected by some sort of authentication.
Wow.
So
I have also seen the kind of things DB mentions on Reddit for just forward your ports, but I feel like anecdotally in the last year or two seen way more of a move towards just use Tailscale or just use Pangolin, which is exciting. It's like Tailscale's penetrated more into our little community, and while Pangolin's not a cure-all for everything in the self-hosted lab, it's so easy that it's easier to say, oh, just install Pangolin on like a $5 a month VPS than it is for people to recommend port forwarding. So I'm really excited to see that kind of software out there now. It's making people more secure by default without even realizing it.
Right. But that kind of goes into what was said earlier about that being a kind of a contentious question, because if you're using somebody else's VPS, if you're using a third-party thing, you're not self-hosting. And those people need to kick rocks, because there's never going to be a one-size-fits-all solution for anything, but for people to be that pretentious about it, it's just an elitist thing to do, and I don't get it.
Yeah, and it's funny because Collins mentioned in the chat, he made kind of a similar joke about Cloudflare as well, because Cloudflare and Tailscale are the two that pop up when people really lean into the, oh, you're not self-hosting. And like, to me, like, sure, there's an element of it, both of them went down this past week, and so people were impacted, and that could have been avoided if you had been using other services. But I think at the end of the day, like, we can't self-host every aspect of our infrastructure. And so I think it's perfectly okay for people to decide what their level of comfort is and how far they want to take that. And for some people, it's trusting Tailscale and having to rely on their turn server or whatever to get their access, knowing that, if their OpenSense router goes down and everything else is up, then they can't access it till they get home. Like, I get it. I don't necessarily use all those services all the time myself, but I understand why people do, and I wouldn't give people flack for it.
Right.
Yeah, it's don't let perfect be the enemy of good. It's a lot of steps that can be incremental. Yeah, there's people in the chat been saying it's a lot of gatekeeping that we really should be discouraging. And I also want to just comment that Scarlet's, I am one of those weird people using NetBird, and I also self-host it, and it is a bit masochistic to try and get it set up, and it is a bit weird. Yeah.
So the next question is interesting. I asked about reverse proxies, and bringing up Cloudflare is interesting because I realized I don't know when people are using Cloudflare tunnels. I think their responses might span VPN and reverse proxy. I think depending on who you ask, they see the way Cloudflare tunnels work in terms of not having to forward any ports, what it truly is. So it does pop up down here. I have no idea. I'm assuming some of its popularity is impacted by the fact that some people who use a VPN and don't use this weren't prompted with this question and didn't get Cloudflare tunnels. But Nginx Proxy Manager took the lead. A little surprising to me because it is, I know it just had a relatively large update, but it feels like one of those platforms that hasn't been actively developed as much as some of these other platforms have. But it's stupid simple Nginx, so I get why people use it. Nginx is always like the default config when developers provide an example of how to proxy their services. So I'm not surprised to see it and all of its other implementations like Linux Server Swag is actually lower on the list than I would have expected. I don't know if that's decreasing as things like Traffic and Caddy are popping up, but it's cool to see the distribution. I'm a Caddy user. I love seeing it here. I don't think anything on this list is more simple to set up than Caddy, and I'll fight you on that. Even Cloudflare tunnels, it is just a dead simple config if you can get the DNS part up and running and working properly. I've tried Traffic before. It is complex. I got frustrated and stopped and haven't thought about it, but I know it's probably something I should revisit at some point in the future.
Yeah, Traffic's documentation.
Oh, sorry,
go ahead.
Please go ahead.
I would say, yeah, Traffic feels complex, but I feel like they need someone on documentation over there, because it's really just their documentation that is the barrier. It's not nearly as friendly as it could be. Once you get the rind around Traffic, it's like, oh, that was actually very simple to do. Just trying to connect the dots in their documentation is a Herculean task, unfortunately.
I made a couple of videos on Traffic fairly early on when I first started making content, and I've actually got a thing still hanging on my wall from years ago where I was a Traffic ambassador. And then I discovered other platforms that I felt were easier. And I think my biggest complaint with Traffic, at least last time I looked at it, like I've got all of my services split up over, each service gets its own LXC. So to try to manage that many remote hosts via Traffic was a nightmare. Like I know I believe you can connect to a remote host, but Nginx Proxy Manager just made it so much easier. I could point to my TV with Nginx Proxy Manager and it would be fine. But trying to get Traffic to communicate with a remote host used to be a nightmare. I don't know if it's gotten better. But if you start with Traffic as your foundational point, and then add labels to your containers as you're deploying them, it's just stupid easy for everything to just automatically come up with labels. But I'm not that forward thinking. So my reverse proxy is always the afterthought once I've got all of my infrastructure built.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and something I didn't mention in the commentary that I probably should have. There's a popular fork of Nginx Proxy Manager that's called npm plus. I think there are just some people who wanted it to move a little quicker than it was and develop their own fork. I think I consolidated responses in the survey results here because it wasn't always obvious to me if someone meant just the vanilla version or the fork. So that might also be skewing this a lot. But Matt, I know you've brought up Pangolin a couple of times. Really cool to see them this high on the list because I'm very positive Pangolin just launched this year. Like I don't think they've been around before 2025. Yeah, so it's really cool to see them so high on the list being so new. Yeah. It's not surprising. I expect them to be much higher next year as well.
Yeah. Their pace of development is insane. Like they went from just that one Pangolin to now they have like a whole tunneling software, and it's great. They're doing big things over there.
Yeah, very cool. Next couple questions are about domains. I don't think we need to spend a ton of time on them, but really just curious: are people using custom domains? Are they just bookmarking, local IP addresses and ports? Most people are using domains, and it's really a good mixture of people purchasing domains, whether it's from super cheap registrars like Cloudflare, Namecheap, Porkbun, but also kind of like the dynamic DNS services like DuckDNS, where they just give you free subdomains for your account. Glad to see people are using that and then hopefully leveraging HTTPS along with it.
Okay.
I will note very specifically this year, and throughout the Formbricks platform that I use, throughout the survey, I could mark questions as required or optional, and when it was optional. There was text on the question that said optional. And I still got so many people who felt forced to answer the optional questions because they didn't see that they were optional. And so as I'm about to caveat this, that I left a note about Cloudflare specifically. I'm wondering if people actually read it now. But I very specifically said, do not check Cloudflare unless you use them as your actual registrar, because so many people purchase their domain names elsewhere and then just bring them into Cloudflare for DNS and all the other fun stuff with Cloudflare. So with that being said, it still blew the others out of the water. I'm still not quite sure it's as popular as this indicates, because when I see people recommending registrars, I feel like Pork Bun and Namecheap are the two big ones. Like I see them pop up so much. I see Cloudflare, but it's hard to believe. I'm still hesitant that these aren't skewed a little bit by Cloudflare's DNS functionality.
Well,
I mean, I
go ahead.
I'll say I believe it. As Jay Collins just said in the chat there, I was also a Google Domains user, and I moved everything to Cloudflare because it was all just right there. And I imagine if you're, someone tells you about Cloudflare tunnels, or you're just trying to set up DNS for the first time, and you see that registered domain in the sidebar, it's just so convenient to have it all right there. So, it makes sense to me that people are using it for everything.
Yeah, and like if you look at last year's results, it kind of follows the same trend from like it's the same top 3 results this year to last year, with fairly similar growth numbers as far as percentages are concerned. And I think, I 100% think just if you can buy your domain at Cloudflare and use Cloudflare DNS or tunnels or whatever, and have everything in one central location, I think people are definitely looking for the simpler solution there.
Yeah.
Yep. And that's fair. That's fair. Maybe it's just me. I don't want all my eggs in one basket, but
sure.
I use Pork Bun, and they use Cloudflare for DNS anyway. If you don't even move your domain over to Cloudflare, so it doesn't even. At the end of the day, I don't think it makes a big difference. I don't know why. That's a hill I'm dying on. But
well, I also use Pork Bun, and I've always appreciated, and I guess I didn't realize that they by default used Cloudflare for their DNS, because I always wondered how they managed to get my DNS switched so quickly. But that explains it.
Yeah, that's probably why.
I've had the same experience with also using Pork Bun for that. I feel like you see, Ethan, you see people loudly proclaiming not to use the same registrar as you use for DNS, but the reality is that it's not as important for people as the people that are loudly proclaiming you shouldn't do it.
Sure.
Yeah. And most of us are going to use Cloudflare for DNS anyway.
Yeah.
Like the number of people using it is probably the majority of these people if they're using a DNS service of some capacity. So, and for those who aren't aware, Google Domains, I think that was acquired by Squarespace. So that's why Squarespace popped up this year. And I noted that in the survey, so people knew to select it. I just didn't include it because it was too long as a label. But if you look at last year's results, it's just like Squarespace kind of pops up where Google Domains was in prior years.
Yeah.
So now I think arguably the most interesting section of the survey, at least for me, software, what are people actually deploying and where are their preferences in terms of software in their home labs. First 2 questions, again, somewhat divisive in the self-hosted community. Are you self-hosting email? And from what I can tell, it's always like overwhelmingly people are not self-hosting email, but there's like some guy who's been doing it out of the back of his pickup truck for the past 30 years and has never had an issue with it. And he pops into every thread and says, hey, you should do it. I've had no problems with it. I've been doing it for 30 years, but it's complex. It's complex.
Yeah. And I'm looking at last year's numbers. The numbers didn't change from last year. Like in the grand scheme of things, we're talking a minuscule amount of difference across the board on both of these email questions, like almost exactly the same numbers.
Yeah, I think the sending component is a little hard for me to understand, because I think in my mind that's the most complex part of self-hosting email is how do you not get blacklisted or how do you build the reputation to make sure all of your mail is delivered? So
Right.
every time I include this email components question, I'm always surprised that it's the most popular. But I know there's also some complexity with receiving to make sure you're not receiving all the spam that's coming through, but also getting everything. So it's interesting.
My question on the sending part of things, um, are people who are using like a local host, like a Mailhog server to get notifications about things internally, are they also including that as sending? Because I know you can set up like a Mailhog server that will give you notifications about things, and I wonder if that's where those numbers are coming from.
It's a good question. Maybe it's something worth diving into next year if we can't get anyone in the chat who might have some experience with that. It'd be interesting to hear.
Just say no to self-hosting email. Yeah, yeah. It's not worth the headache.
It's like I'm just imagining like a '90s commercial or ad where just anyway, database deployment, moving past email. How are people deploying databases? Overwhelming amount of people are doing it via containers, not surprising. And then the people who are doing it containers tend to do it in separate databases for every service, which makes sense. That's one of the benefits of containers. I will say I do a shared container database deployment for my infrastructure.
So scary.
At least for services that are on, and it's just like I love being so like into the weeds of managing my infrastructure. Like I don't mind the upkeep and the backup associated with doing all that. I knock on wood, I've not run into any issues, but I probably will now that I've mentioned it. I think in past years, DB, you've mentioned like, oh, I can't believe, people are so crazy that would do that. And in the back of my mind, I'm like, I'm doing it.
Like that's why all of my different services each have their own LXC. Is if in case something goes down, I can fix that one LXC based on yesterday's backup. And so far that served me very well. But the idea of putting all of my eggs in one basket, as you just put it a moment ago, just scares the crap out of me. Like trying to figure out which database tables I need to restore from yesterday's database backup to bring everything. No, not going to do that.
Yeah, but I bet I'm running at least 20 or 25 services that need a database. And I've never run into issues of database requirements where something didn't support the actual version I was using in my shared. So in my mind, like I think it's a little less complex than people say.
Maybe.
But again, maybe I've just gotten lucky.
I think you've been pretty lucky. I've had plenty of experiences with I used to do shared as well, and then I stopped doing it, and I've just had plenty. Like Image has changed their Postgres database a few times to support different extensions. The few, like, I'm not sure if I'm pronouncing this correctly, Dwarish, the GPS tracking, they've changed theirs a few times. They've changed minimum versions, and I cannot imagine having to export all that out and then start up a new one and then re-import everything again instead of just having it all separated per stack. That's crazy.
Yeah, I guess it's just for us masochists. But anyway, moving into the next several questions are specifically about what software are people using across a number of categories. A lot of them are new. This first one, media streaming, isn't, but actually super insightful, and looking forward to chatting about the results and also hearing what people are using in the chat. First one, media streaming. Jellyfin, number one. Again, it has very much taken the lead over Plex versus prior years, for sure. And I know Plex has been caught up in so much nonsense this year, so I'm not sure if it's an element of that a lot of people have migrated to Jellyfin, or if again just the audience of the survey differed enough that more people prefer Jellyfin. But overwhelmingly, people prefer Jellyfin who responded to the survey.
I've recently gotten to the point where I'd like to have a personal conversation with whoever decided to change the Plex app for the Roku devices. I feel like there should be a public lynching for that person. The change that was made was so drastic that they're getting drug in all of the forums because they moved everything from the left column to a series of submenus across the top and makes everything much more difficult to access. Super frustrating. My wife hates it. The kid hates it. I hate it. Thousands of people online hate it. And the developer is like, yeah, sucks to suck. Like we're not gonna go back to the way we were. And I can't imagine the thought process that went into let's make our UI worse. But also, I think one of the reasons that people tend to go Jellyfin is the same reason that people think that hosting something on a VPS isn't self-hosting. Using Cloudflare tunnels isn't self-hosting because Plex is a corporation. So by using them, you're shilling. There's very much that mindset when you look at Reddit posts and that sort of thing, as far as media consumption is concerned, that if you're using Plex, then you're not self-hosting your own media server, basically.
Yeah, it's closed source. You rely on them for authentication. So if they go down, I think locally you're fine, but your users can't access things. Like I get it. Like that's absolutely a factor in that. And it's funny you bring up the Roku client. A couple of months ago, my in-laws mentioned something to me about their Roku Plex having issues. It changed. In my mind, I'm like, oh, like it's probably not bad. They're just, and I remember when I saw it, I was like, this is awful.
Yeah.
Like, I have no idea who signed off on this, but it was, even for me, it was not intuitive to use.
Yeah.
So it's interesting to hear you bring that up.
No, it's been my wife has been asking, isn't there something else that we can use? And like from my experience, like we used MB in the past for a while, but the user interface on the app on a Roku TV was garbage, and I don't know if it's gotten better, but I haven't looked at Jellyfin. I don't know what the interface looks like because all of our TVs are Roku now because it was the easiest thing for Plex. And now they've screwed that up, and I don't know what the options are as far as a Jellyfin interface on Roku.
I haven't heard about this Roku fiasco. Well, I don't have any Rokus in my house specifically, but none of my users have also complained about it. So I'm not sure if everyone's avoided it or if it's just been a non-issue for them. But I have to agree with Jay Collins and Scarlett's in the chat there that until Jellyfin can get easier for non-technical people, I'm on the Plex train myself. I've been on it since before Jellyfin was decently usable, but man, just for like people's parents and stuff, it's just so much easier to have them sign up for an account on a website and then they just send me their email and they automatically are in. It's just they don't want to have to deal with setup, and it's as much as Plex is for me. For the people that rely on it in my life, I'm not gonna make them go through Jellyfin setup and the trials and tribulations that go with that just because of a principle.
Right.
So.
Yep. Matt, I'm curious for some of these other platforms listed on the question here, especially since you've developed Multi-Scrobbler and I assume you stream a ton of, I know you stream a ton of music. What does your music setup look like? Or what platforms are you using to bring that together? And I'm half expecting you to say like Spotify and something, but
yeah, it's just Spotify. I mean, I have a decently sized local collection from prior to Spotify being a real big thing that I still use with it's in Plex and it's also on Navidrome and Jellyfin, but basically just for Navidrome and Jellyfin are for testing Multi-Scrobbler. But I use PlexAmp if I want to listen to my local stuff because it's a great interface. Again, it's just I know it's paid and it's not exactly self-hosted, but man, it's just so easy.
Right.
And then we have Plex for video, but the majority of my streaming or audio is Spotify because it's just, even at the price point now, it's still, I listen to so much music. It's not worth, I don't listen to albums at a time. So like the R software around audio acquisition just doesn't support the way that I listen to music. So I just pay for Spotify and they have a great API and a great interface and it just works. So yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Nice.
Shifting to the next question, file storage and syncing. There's a lot listed here, and there's a lot of software that that does different things. I think I was trying to capture, and this is multi-select, so people could select multiple things. So if you're using Nextcloud to, share things with friends, but using File Browser to manage yourself from the browser, like you could select both. I was just really trying to figure out what are people using to either manage their files externally or even internally. A lot of these are internal tools as well. And so nothing super surprising here, similar to last year. Nextcloud and SyncThing, top 2 responses.
Synology
Synology,
jumped from
yeah.
5 to 3, and has 5 times the results that it did last year. Again, which surprises me after the nonsense they pulled this year. To see it go up that much really kind of surprised me.
It just really reinforces there's no such thing as bad press. Although
Right.
with Plex did go down, so maybe there's bad press when you're Plex. But file browser continues to be popular. I think a lot of the same platforms we saw before. Nextcloud is interesting because everyone loves to hate on Nextcloud, but everyone uses Nextcloud. So it's surprising, but not surprising, I guess, to see it up there. Next question is authentication. This was new this year. If people are using a centralized platform for authentication or identity management, whatever you want to call it, what are you using? There are a lot of popular ones, and this is a good mixture of what I called legacy platforms and new ones. So Authelia, Authentic, Keycloak, those are kind of like the de facto platforms I think of when people talk about these things. But Pocket ID, Pangolin, TinyAuth, I think all of those are 2025 launches. Pocket ID maybe was last year. I can't remember, but I know TinyAuth and Pangolin were both 2025. So it's really cool to see how much those have kind of infiltrated the rankings here.
And I really like Matt was saying earlier, Pangolin has just come out of nowhere. And they started with just a real simple reverse proxy, and then immediately it blew up into basically a Cloudflare tunnel replacement service. And they built authentication into it. And I know they don't have a huge team. And I can't imagine what kind of coding sessions they've got to be having to do all of this quickly.
Yeah, their velocities, and it's really crazy. I don't know how and their documentation's pretty good too.
Yeah.
It's really, really impressive.
The next question is note-taking and documentation. I almost need to zoom out a little bit for this one. This is another one that there are a lot of platforms listed here that do a lot of different things. To me, there's not like a clear distinction between note-taking and like documentation / wiki platforms. It feels like they're often used interchangeably, and so that's why I've grouped them together. Although I'm sure some people will disagree with that. And oddly enough, I included Obsidian because I actually don't know if I included Obsidian last year.
You did,
but
and it was number 1 there too.
Yeah, so it's like if I didn't, people responded enough with it that I felt that I needed to include it as an actual selectable response.
Gotcha.
Because the overwhelming amount of people are using Obsidian, which there was some discussion in some of the places I posted the survey results. Is Obsidian self-hosted? Like is a desktop app that you can sync the back end to different places self-hosted? Traditionally, I don't think it necessarily is, but I've never used Obsidian, and I'm wondering what I'm missing out on.
I've had that same question.
It's crazy. Matt, I assume you don't use Obsidian then?
No, I've been using AnyType, and it's been all right. But I honestly am not very organized for note taking in general, so this category of software hasn't been high on my list of things to experiment with. Did I miss it? You use something on this list, right? Do you use a Fine or is it Outline?
I use Outline on this list.
Yeah.
Which is very similar to that. It's similar to DocMost. Like a lot of these have kind of that similar look to them. But again, this is also like a nice mixture of newer and kind of older software and platforms here. Silver Bullet is one I've been playing with a lot lately. It's very extensible, very almost programmatic, if that's the right word for it. I don't actually keep a whole lot of documentation or notes in it, but it's actually really fun to play with. If no one's checked it out, absolutely look into it. But interesting, Nextcloud Notes is also interesting. I guess given the amount of people who are deploying Nextcloud, it makes sense that they're also using it for notes.
Yeah.
It's just great to see so many options, honestly. It's like so many actively developed choices here.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah.
Next question. Git. What are people using for Git? So Git is the first option. I'm not super surprised. I think Git has always been a little more popular for most of the homelab crowd because it's a lot more lightweight than GitLab is. For JO, which is the fork of Git, is growing in popularity. I wouldn't be surprised to see that match Git or surpass it in the next year or two. There's been some controversy across some things Git has been doing. I can't speak to it a whole lot myself, but interesting nonetheless. Especially given how prevalent GitHub is in the self-hosting space. It's comforting to see a lot of people are still using self-hosted Git forges.
One of the both Git and Forjo. How did you pronounce it? Is that how it's pronounced?
Yeah, for JO. I've looked it up so many times.
Oh,
Yeah.
gosh. Okay. I've been pronouncing it wrong all this time. Anyway, both of them now support some subset of GitHub Actions runners, which is really exciting. And they both have their disadvantages and advantages on what they exactly support. But I'm really glad to see both of them at least supporting it, and it's exciting to have that kind of like GitOps functionality in the self-hosted scene now.
Yeah, Matt, I actually
Maybe
think
GitLab as well, but I'm not sure. I only know about Git and 4JO having that.
Yeah, I actually think, Matt, you helped me out when I was deploying for JO a month or two ago. I remember you and I were chatting about the runners and stuff, and you sent me a tool I hadn't come across. So, home automation. How many people are deploying software for smart home or home automation? A lot of deploys, not as many as I would suspect, given how prevalent Home Assistant is in this space, but it's still a lot. I guess it's not surprising that there are a fair amount of people who just don't care to dabble in this space, whether it's because their spouse is just tired of their lights not turning on or whatever other stigmas are associated with it. Not a whole lot more to ask about this question. Last year I asked about protocols. So like, do you use Zigbee or Z-Wave? And those results were interesting, but Home Assistant is kind of just like the name of the game in this space. There are a couple other voice assistants that have been popping up that I've seen kind of take on what Home Assistant has done in voice, but nothing. I don't. If there's a platform out there that rivals Home Assistant, I'm not aware of it.
No.
I've seen a few different things, but nothing to that level. Sorry for jumping in there late.
No worries. No worries. Game servers are next. More people aren't hosting a game server than are, which isn't surprising. And then when you look at the games that are being hosted, Minecraft accounts for 37% of responses, which is wild. But again, given the popularity of Minecraft, has been interesting if you go back and look at last year's responses. The other games mentioned, like, it has fluctuated a little bit. You see some new games pop up and some others drop off. So you can kind of see the trends, but there are a lot of games that I had never heard of actually when I was putting this together. I had to look up to make sure I was spelling everything correctly. But it's cool to see kind of how, I'll say fractured, but that has a negative connotation, but just how many different games people can host on their own.
Yeah.
And then everyone's favorite question on the survey, the hardest question to aggregate the results for, because every response, regardless of how simple of a word it is, will be misspelled 10 different times that I have to go through and scrub the data. But very similar to prior years, Home Assistant, Jellyfin at the top. I actually think Jellyfin was the top answer last year. And so Jellyfin and Home Assistant swapped, which is kind of unusual given how much more prevalent Jellyfin seems to be versus Plex this year. But it sounds like Home Assistant, again, they've had a bunch of new hardware launches since. Not unusual to see them kind of gaining traction in that space. Image, I think one of us mentioned image earlier. I'm surprised we haven't spoken about it more. Maybe there's like a photos question I should have asked, photos and videos. But especially with their big version 2 launch, expect them to start seeing them grow in popularity. Yeah, a lot of you, I'm watching the chat to see if people are bringing up anything specific. A lot of these platforms I'm familiar with. I didn't see anything pop up that I hadn't heard of. Pliehole and AdGuard are kind of low in terms of ad blocking. I assumed more people would be adamant about their ad blocking capabilities, but interesting nonetheless.
I think those are the kind of apps that we set up and we don't think about them ever again. It just works. It blends into the background. I went to a friend's house a while back and they had a Roku TV up and it was just on the screensaver and I didn't think much about it until I started seeing ads on the Roku TV screensaver. And I was like, what? Like it never occurred to me that they would put ads on the screensaver because I've never seen them on my TVs. So it was something I didn't think about because it's just part of my infrastructure that runs quietly and diligently in the background. And I think maybe that's why those aren't quite as high as we would expect them to be for favorite apps, because people just forget that they're there.
Yeah, it's one of those things you never notice it unless it's not working,
right?
Type thing. Pangolin. Pangolin seems to be like the pangolin. Jellyfins seem to be the big theme in this year's survey. Komodo's popping up there as well. And I know we're approaching an hour and a half, so I know we'll probably start to wrap this up here soon. The last section of questions are demographics. These absolutely have not really changed at all this year. None of the information is super surprising. I will say I felt kind of bad because I think I included up to like the 80, 90-year-old age range last year, and no one responded beyond 69. And so I didn't include that this year. And then someone reached out and was like, hey, I'm over 70 and I self-host. Where's that option? And I felt really bad. So I think I'm just going to include to like 120 next year just to make sure I have everyone captured. But it was really cool to hear about, a 70-something-year-old self-hosting.
That's awesome.
I hope I'm still as into this when I'm 70, 80 years old as I am now.
Right.
But overwhelming amount of people between 20 and 50 years old.
Yeah.
By the way, as I think I'm going to hit like the three of us as we go down this. I feel like I'm describing the three of us in a way, which makes me think maybe we need next year a little more diversity on the commentators for the survey. Gender, 94% of people are male respondents. A little more representation this year than prior years, so it's really cool to see that. I don't know what we can do to encourage more diversity and participation from other genders in the space, but if anyone has any suggestions or if I can do anything via my content, always happy to look into it. Career field, self-hosters are more likely to work in technology related fields. DB, I guess you're in a technology field. I was wondering that earlier, like how you would have responded to this question.
It's a weird question for me to answer because this is my job. Like my job is talking about tech online. So I guess I think I responded that technically my career field is technology. But like going back prior to doing YouTube, I was a front-end web developer. I've done those kinds of things in the past. I've done hardware testing in the past. So a lot of my history comes from actually being out in the workforce in a technology field. But I've just kind of put myself in one because that's where I ended up, kind of by accident. But yeah.
I guess technology, just not the traditional like technology role when you think of it, but
right.
I feel like YouTubers with 100,000 subscribers are a very, very small portion of the population.
Probably, yeah. There's a few of us. There's a few of us.
Mobile operating systems, Android's the most popular. I when I first started the self-host, I was surprised at how many iPhone users there are. I just always assumed everyone in technology was more Android leaning, but iOS is not unpopular. The 32% is not insignificant for sure.
Yeah, looking at last year's numbers, they actually didn't change all that much compared to last year for between iOS and Android. But more Android users this year than last year by a bigger margin. But iOS users didn't really change all that much.
Yeah. Yeah, and Graphene OS that popped up this year as well. That was on last year's chart. Also received a fair amount of responses. I think that's more privacy focused, like the de-Googled Android. Next question I include just so I can shame people throughout the year.
That's good.
It's a good talking point to bring up when I'm running out of things to say, talk about in the newsletter. More people don't donate to self-hosted projects than do donate. Would definitely encourage people to think about it. I don't know, everyone's financial situation, so certainly don't want to pressure, but a lot of developers are putting a lot of their own time and effort into the things that I think we take for granted. I spend so much time deploying self-hosted software. I like to make sure people are somewhat compensated for that.
Yeah.
It's an interesting statistic, especially given the correlation between self-hosting and open source software.
Yeah. I would like to see questions next year on people's contributions non-financially to like this industry. Like how many people are actual OSS developers, or how many are, if you're not a full developer making your own bespoke app, have you published any Docker containers that you use or let other people use? Like, what kind of contributions are people making back that aren't financial? I think we all kind of know what the answer to that is, the percentages wise, but it would still be interesting to see.
Yeah, I agree. I think
Absolutely.
it would help. I think it would help kind of define who the respondents are to a certain degree, if they are people who are contributing to projects or building their own projects. I think that would be kind of an interesting a bit of information to have.
Oh, yeah. Maybe even, you maybe haven't made your own container, but have you contributed any YAML configurations for automations and Home Assistant? Have you helped other people out in a non-trivial way, in a material way with setting up their systems? That would be interesting to know.
Yeah.
Yeah. And John just mentioned in the chat about donating isn't just money, but time to the project. There is so much you can do to contribute. I think documentation, I think so many devs would kill to have people help with their documentation, translation, things like that. There are things we can do to contribute that aren't just, financially contributing.
Yeah.
So, and then lastly, we have education here. I should probably swap these two because education is a little more, anyway, self-hosters, my takeaway was they tend to be more educated than the general population, but there's still a nice variety and representation across different educational experiences. I will say I got a lot of feedback that this was not very internationalized. There were people in places like Europe who were like, I don't really know what my level of education translates to. This is very US oriented. So I'll have to give that some thought into how I can do that for next year. So apologies to anyone.
I'd never actually considered the idea that they may have a different educational ranking or whatever system. Yeah, that's weird.
Yeah. So that was the last question. Again, I thought this year's survey was super interesting. We got just over 4,000 responses, which was 400 or 500 more than last year, which was super exciting. These results are obviously public on my website. I also publish them on GitHub as well, just in a JSON file if people want to do their own things with them. If you want to display them elsewhere, you don't need permission from me. You don't even need to cite me, although it's always nice if you do. You can use them for whatever purposes you'd like. Feel free to. DB, once again, thanks for opening up your YouTube home to me to chat about the live stream.
I enjoy doing this every year. I genuinely enjoy hanging out and chatting about all this stuff.
Yeah, cool. And Matt, thanks for joining as well. Super interesting to get some other insights from people who aren't just DB and I. And of course, you also develop a self-hosted platform. So Also super interesting to hear from you.
Thanks for having me. This was a great time. I'm glad I was a guest. Appreciate it.
Absolutely.
And DB, I think you dropped some links in the description. I think if you want to get a hold of any of us, right?
Yeah, there are links to all kinds of stuff down there. You should definitely check out. I'm not smart enough to get there in the back end of YouTube here, but yeah, no, definitely check out the links in the video description if you want to get more information about anything going on there. I look forward to doing this again next year. Like I said, I always enjoy hanging out and going through the data and having a good conversation about what we're seeing across the community.
Yep, absolutely. And thanks to everyone for joining us. Thanks for everyone who participated in the survey.
Yeah.
But thank you also to those who joined us and have been chatting with us. A lot more interesting to talk about these results while also seeing what everyone else thinks about them as well versus just the three of us.
Yeah.
So
Good times.
cool. Thanks, everyone.
All right. Well, thank you guys for hanging out. If you enjoyed the stream, be sure to give it a like. Like I mentioned, we do this every year. We've done this for the last 3 years anyway. I imagine as long as nothing goes catastrophically wrong, we'll be here again doing this next year as well. So again, thank you to everyone who stopped by, hung out, jumped in the chat, or whether you chatted or lurked. That's awesome. Thank you so much for hanging out, and we'll talk to you again here real soon.